The way I want to approach this topic of human risk is by taking a closer look at what actually makes cybersecurity a business priority. And that matters because effectively, if you know, whenever you want to address a particular risk within cybersecurity, you do need that notion, that support by the management from top down when you want to get started. So one way of doing this is to look at it from a culture perspective. Organizational culture, you know, of course, there's also something called security culture. At KnowBe, my employer, we focus on, building security culture to reduce human risk. We are a global company by now. We've got offices around the world. We did start out in the Tampa Bay area in the US. And now, for example, in the UK, we have an office in Leeds. When we think about, of course, cybersecurity and a large proportion of that risk that we are facing, then inevitably we also have to remind ourselves that there is 65 to about 90%, depending on the kind of report you read, but 65 to 90% of the risk that's attributed to human behavior. Humans, therefore, are sometimes called your weakest link, are sometimes called the weakest part of the chain, are very much so looked down upon and frowned upon at times. Now, I want to change that. It doesn't usually sit well with people in your organization, not at all. If you think about it, there's one thing your organization doesn't exist without. That's humans. There is no production, there's no value creation, there's no sales, there is no profit, there's no benefit, no nothing. So your organization literally cannot do without humans. And that's something we need to really take in as cybersecurity professionals, that we are in fact part of what services the organization, part of what enables the organization, and also part of what can make a huge difference in the organization. So really, I do invite you to sort of change your mind and be with me when I say humans are your biggest asset. In that area of addressing human risk or raising awareness among people or influencing behavior, we've been active for a long time, not just me, but the entire industry, and you will know this. For decades, we've been trying to educate people and raise the awareness among them, because as the idea being, as soon as they know about all of the threats out there, of course, they then ought to behave more securely. Well, reality is we are in 2024, and it still doesn't work, does it? And that's because there's way more to it than just awareness. Awareness is just the first step. Without it doesn't work, but what ultimately matters are behaviors, and those are typically embedded in a culture, and that's where I'm sort of going with this. So you see, a behavior drives an outcome, and an outcome really determines the risk posture of your organization. It's not the awareness, it doesn't matter. You still have people clicking on links, although they, in theory, should know better. What matters is that they do click or don't click. Or that they do download the software, or they didn't download the software, which turned out to be a malware, turned out to be a ransomware attack. So it really matters what people do, but there's also the reality that people hardly ever act in isolation, and they do so embedded in a culture. And culture is something we all sort of think we know, and of course we're part of it, so we do, but as we are talking about it right now, and as we have to talk about how we shape and influence that culture, we need to define it. There are many definitions if you look at security culture. I particularly like this one. Security culture is defined as the ideas, customs, and social behaviors that impact the security of your organization. So ideas being, for example, the understanding that security requires action by every single one of us, not just the information security department, not just single particular individuals. It is also an understanding that there are certain customs around security. Now, I'm not wearing a badge because I literally just ran in, but everyone else does it, right? So that's what identifies you. That's perhaps also what you're doing in all of your organizations in any case. So there's a custom. It's customary to wear the badge. And then there are social behaviors. And that's a key ingredient, really, to all of it. Are you looking at a culture, at an organization where people voluntarily and proactively support and help each other? I'm talking in general. But of course, I'm also specifically talking about cybersecurity. What if someone is uncertain whether and how they can share a large file? Will they just try to figure it out, use Dropbox, use any of the file sharing services he would disapprove of, or do they in fact talk to a trusted colleague and they figure it out and they say, hey, actually, be reminded there's a policy that tells you to use, I don't know, WeTransfer, Google Drive, whatever the services you're using. So social behaviors and mutual support, they do matter a lot. Perhaps to look at it from a slightly different angle. How do you know you have a good security culture, or how do you know you have a bad security culture? Well, let's take the example of environment protection. What you can see here, obviously, is a person collecting some trash somewhere in the nature, perhaps in a park or somewhere, National Trust site, whatever it might be. So what does that mean? A, there's a person that sort of looks official because they seem to be wearing a uniform, so they've been hired to do something. B, not everyone gets it. Someone has thrown the trash, so the collection is necessary. But see, you can also easily imagine that perhaps there is a group of volunteers that would help with collecting the trash. Now, what I'm telling you is, if you sense, if you know, if you feel that in your organization people care to the extent that they take action about cybersecurity, that they do proactively help each other, then you are on the right path. Then you have those champions, cybersecurity champions that you can identify and that will help you build sustainable security culture. My colleague, and I often like to quote him because he just appears to and happens to be way more eloquent than I am, he likes to put it this way. Perry Carpenter is his name. He says, this goes way beyond awareness or coercing secure behaviors. It's about making workers value security where they proactively participate in taking steps that reduce risk. So that is really what this is all about. It's about making people value, appreciate, and want to be part of cyber security. To put this into perspective, because I did say there's awareness, there's behavior, and there's culture, we need all of these ingredients, and they all fit in. You look at the inner circle, that's sort of your inside perspective. You have knowledge, you have values, they sort of relate to behaviors. But then also you have the outside perspective, cultural elements, group dynamics, context, what is possible in terms of what does the software allow you to do, what does the environment allow you to do, and then of course social pressures, what is expected of me. So these are the kind of elements that you can shape and elements that you can influence. And when it comes down to that, I want to highlight to you that there is a model that you can rely on that shows you that even for a single individual person, many of the things that we face in organizations are closely intertwined. They do not happen to exist in isolation. Our cognition, our knowledge of cybersecurity threats does not exist outside my attitude towards it. That does not exist outside my notion of compliance or my willingness to adhere to norms. So all of this plays a role, and you need to comprehensively and holistically shape security culture because people face that complex environment. Question is, of course, how do you do that? Good news is there are many organizations who do that right now, and there are maturity models that allow you to determine your status quo, that allow you to evaluate your gaps, and that allow you to derive actions. 5 levels we have in our maturity model, much like you would see in many other maturity models. And what you can see here are gray dots. Every single gray dot represents one organization. You have thousands of organizations in there, of course. And you see they are centered around, they're somewhat normally distributed and centered around level 2 and 3. And that happens to be levels that are largely driven by compliance or by standards. For example, the ISO 27001 standard that tells you do regularly train your users and do phishing simulations. But what you can also see is the blue line, which is the maturity line, and then the red dashed line, which is the likelihood of a data breach and the related remediation costs. And you can see they sort of only come down after level 3. And that's to do with the transformative nature of going from thinking and addressing awareness, just knowledge delivery, to actually influencing behaviors. And if that's something where you find yourself at, that's something you would want to do, then you're definitely on the right path. As you can see here, the red dashed line really comes down very, very quickly. And that leads me almost to the end of the presentation, because there's this big question, and that big question is, are you ready to go this step? Are you ready to appreciate that perhaps training once a year is as good as not training at all? If you don't believe me, come talk to us. We've got the data really to back this up. What you need to do is you need to have a structured program that is transformative in nature, by which I mean that wants to and targets and wants to shape behaviors and targets behaviors and elements of culture to really achieve sustainable change. And yes, as this graph tells you, the effort on the horizontal axis is a bit higher, but the impact, that's where you're potentially gaining a lot. Because what you're doing at the end of the day, remember, is you're addressing 65 to 95% of the human risk that contributes to as many data breaches. So with that, I would like to thank you for your attention, and I'm here to take any questions.